zoom in so we can see it in full screen.
Oh, like this.
Even bigger. Yeah. Oh, that too big, too big. I think there's a delay between our computers.
We're gonna start with this.
Still looks too big on my screen now.
Oh.
Like your writing is off screen. That's perfect. Great. Okay. Perfect. Well, welcome to Neuroccino, everyone, our weekly online journal club where we discuss exciting science, and exciting is defined by you. Whatever gets you excited, we discuss. The only rule is you don't present your own research, but someone else's. Everyone is welcome, so just bring a book chapter, a paper, a YouTube video. We had it all. Just bring whatever gets you excited about science. Today we have Michel Thibault-Deschatin, who is the head of department here in Bordeaux, present the paper, A Connectomics-based Taxonomy of Mammals. And he's already sharing the screen, so take it away.
Hi, thank you. So I picked up this paper, which is actually a preprint. It just came out like a few days ago, because I'm like so excited about brain evolution. And when you work on brain evolution, you know, the main issues that you come down to is having access to the data. Who Yannick has been spending probably the 10-15 last years to collect postmortem diffusion weighted imaging in multiple postmortem species. That was always his hobby, and he has so much data, it's like absolutely crazy. You'll see after that. The other issue is just a strategic mathematical issue is how do you compare two brains that are of different species? You know, what is like the features that you're going to use to be able to match those brains together and having a point of comparisons. So some people have been using just, you know, the surface and trying to stretch and apply normalization or registration between brains and calculate how much you have to stretch and use that as a feature to compare different brains. Some others have been using the nomenclature of white matter tracks. I've been doing this, and Roger Mars have been doing this as well, where you extract the same track in different species and compare them either like qualitatively, which is what I did, or quantitatively, which is what Roger Mars is doing. And like the crucial point was like, how can you just do it in a data-driven approach for the connections being maybe more informative than just the shape of the brain and giving us information about the functioning itself of the brain. And in this paper, this bunch of authors will include Yannick because they use this database, Olaf Sporn and Martin van der Wal, because they used like some graph theory in there. Seems to have found a way to do it. You know, I forgot to mention, but also comparing different species is a way to really assess mechanism of brain evolution, and that's why it's so interesting. So beside curiosity and trying to understand how the brain work, by comparing different species, you have a little glimpse at, you know, former ancestors that we had that were like the common ancestor between species, and you can infer about mechanism of brain evolution. So basically what they did, they've been studying the diffusion weighted imaging of 124 different species. And they regrouped them into 12 taxonomic orders and 5 superorders, which are like really the level where they're going to make inferences, because you'll see that actually even within the same taxonomic order or the superorder, you have a lot of viability. And so how did they do it? So what they did, they calculated the tractography for all those diffusion data sets, And based on the whole connectome, they use a k-mean clustering of 200 clusters, which is probably the only, we can discuss that later, which is probably the only criticisms I could have, is why 200. And based on these 200 clusters, they can create those kind of connectomic matrix that are not comparable directly between species because those clusters are not the same. So their strategy, so you see, like they have like different categories, including primates, and here you have like the Rodentia, Legomorpha, and then here you're gonna have cats, and well, those are part of the carnivores. You can, you get like so many getting up to the bats. It's like very interesting. So how do you get rid of this sticky problem of having 200 regions that are showing a pattern of connectivity that is not equivalent or exactly the same between your different species? So they transform those connectivity matrices into spectrums using a Laplacian transformation, like up. So the normalized Laplacian of the connectivity matrices. I'm just gonna have to reduce a little bit because I can't find where I am. And this transformation in Laplacian connectivity allows them to make a correspondence, a correlation, if you want, between the Laplacian transformation between different orders and different species. And they repeat that like thousands of times using different members of different orders. And to the spectrums, they could add also like some additional information that are derived from the graph theory derived from those 200 regions from which they have the tractography. And the graph theory is showing the emerging property of the network and is completely independent of its topology. You don't care if you don't respect anatomy with graph theory, really. It's all about how things are connected together. And all that together, that allows them to make this very nice illustration here. You can have, and this one would be just for the Laplacian spectrum, a comparison between the distance between species of the same order and species of a different order. And you can see that species of a different order are slightly more different than the one of the same order, which is not surprising. But what I find really interesting is some of the species of the same order will be more different than species of a different order, which support two things, which is like evolution is really very fast-paced, but also proportionally kept. It's not like going to happen between today and tomorrow, but also some of the similarities that you can have between species might not necessarily always be linked to the same order, but they can be converging similarities, which is nature found the same way to adapt to a threat, which is not coming from a common ancestor, it's just coming from a natural evolution, which we call convergent evolution. They repeated this analysis with the graph theory approach, which show like even like a sharper difference for some of those features, such as so they do this same spec, but with a different characteristic of the graph theory, and you can see that no matter how they take the tractography, whether they take binary or weighted, you still find differences between intra-order and inter-order comparisons. And just out of curiosity, the local feature included degree, clustering, betweenness and closeness of the graph, and the global feature were characterized by path length, transitivity, and assortativity. just gonna reduce like this, go on the next page. And like, when you compare all those species and some have a very small brain, you might be, yes, but maybe some of those brain were just made out of noise because it's very difficult to scan post-mortem and with like good parameters, and they thought about that. So this is an interesting chart which compare like the graph organization versus like a random organization. And this is a way to demonstrate the small world architecture. So if the brain that you used for your connectivity is located on the top over here of the scatter plot, that means there is a small world architecture. If it's located at the bottom over here, that means there is no small world architecture in that network. So all the diffusion weighted imaging tractography show the small world architecture, which demonstrates that they're far more than noise. Let's come back. Oh, good. All right. No, not the equation, this. And so what we can see, that's also a conclusion that I found very interesting, is that the differences that might happen between the species are not so much related to the long connections, they're more related to the short connections. And I find this interesting because that was an hypothesis that we had in previous papers that we published on inter-individual variability, showing that within a species you have a high level of inter-individual variability of the short connections that is higher than long connections. And we always thought that that was a reflection of like some kind of mechanism of evolution. And this is a demonstration that actually between species, you have a different differences that are mostly driven by short connection and less by long connection. So I was so happy to see that. That's about it. I hope you're not noxious of me like flicking through like the different pages, but I'll be happy to take your question if I can answer it, because then mathematically the paper is dense.
Thanks, Michelle. This is great. We definitely need to cite them once we get the reviewers' comments back for our paper.
Yeah.
Whoa! What are you showing us here?
It's just
this is a bit heavy for a Monday morning. Just say.
I didn't wanna scare you off.
I need more coffee for this.
No, I obviously understand all of this.
Yeah, I just had one look and I know what's going on.
I'm kidding. So that's just the equation that explain what is betweenness, what is the shortest path length. It's just reference equations. But that,
Cool. Any questions? No, I can see applause. No questions. That's a first. Well, you said you wanted to discuss some aspects of the methods. Do you want to expand on that a little bit and see if anyone?
Yeah. So, and I started tweeting about this weekend with the authors. I'll say it's a beautiful paper, and let's just I want to mention that I absolutely loved it. And the only sticky part, I think, where there can be discussion is the beginning of how do you build those matrices. And they made like the assumption, because it was necessary, I'm sure they're aware of that, that they could divide every single connectome in 200 regions based on a k-mean clustering. So that's a data-driven division, but you have to impose the number of cluster you want to have. And that opened up to me is a question whether, like, do every species really have the same number of clusters? And are you kind of like forcing differences if they don't by doing the same number of cluster? So I was wondering, and I didn't see it in the paper nor in the supplementary material, whether a data-driven approach of the number of cluster will be a better approach. At least, you're not like forcing differences. But then you cannot do the Laplacian kind of connectivity signature, but you can still do the graph theory. Although they try to get out of this sticky problem by showing that toward the end, so there is no difference in the connectivity lengths across species. Within species you have it, but across species it's actually quite comparable, as you can see here, as you have like the track length and the distribution is always Gaussian. You have a viability, which is completely associated with a brain size. But when you compare all the species, it seems quite comparable. And then they played around to correct for the network density, because if you force this number of regions and you have a difference in the densities that will happen. So they model for that. And my understanding is that they took out the variance that was related to the track density in and many other features to have like the purest measure of the connectivity matrix. All right, now we got questions. So I stop talking and start listening.
Great.
Go ahead, Hervé.
I think Hervé was first, yeah.
Yeah, so I click on applause, but I wanted to ask a question. But great talk. No, it's a short question, and I think I know the answer. This is why they didn't put human's brain in this paper, because they could. But my answer, they want to keep it for the next paper. But maybe there is another answer.
So it's a very good question. No, I don't think they put the human brain in there. We can double check, but I don't think it is in there.
No.
Yeah,
at the end.
Right here. Those are all the species.
Or maybe I didn't see it, but
they have the brain of a giraffe.
Yeah,
you know.
It's like close. It's close, but not enough.
So cool. But no, there is no human, and I think it's because there is something very special with the human brain that they couldn't fit in there. But they put the bottlenose dolphin in there.
That's why I was wondering, but maybe they want to apply the same methodology comparing human brains and other species.
Maybe, maybe. That's a very good point. Leah.
Okay, thanks. So I was thinking, so I'm a huge fan of the Laplacian, but I was thinking then when they compare the spectra and they see that they are different, so what's the take-home message? So what they can understand then from the different brains of the species?
So like the strategy is to estimate the distance between the species connectome, and the Laplacian spectrum is a way to calculate a distance which is independent of the anatomical parcellation. That's what it is. And in so doing, they can actually rebuild kind of like a proximity tree of the different brains, which give you the global order of the different brains, which actually they did.
Like a taxonomic tree of evolution. Okay.
But they didn't put a tree in the paper, which that's a very good suggestion, and that's a preference. So I hope they're hearing us. That'd be great if there was like. The other thing that is interesting is, as I mentioned, when you do that, you realize that. So it's not only about like a subjective observation, it's really quantitative. And you can see that some species within the same order can be more different than species between orders. And that's something that is really important to know, because that support a lot of theory, of a lot of assumption about there is some convergent evolution, or, you know, there is also some very fast evolution mechanisms. So you take, for example, the dogs. I think it takes about like 20 to 30 years to create entirely a new species of dog. through selective breeding. That's crazy. It's nothing.
Okay, now I understood the importance. Okay, thank you.
Valentina.
Valentina, sorry.
How does this translate back to cognition? I mean, do they hypothesize any common behaviors that may be related to the commonalities between among species?
No, not that I saw, but we discussed that in our paper on anti-individual viability. So the idea was like, because short connections are the letters that evolve onto the evolution tree, not the long ones. So you have new association and new regions that are built among close areas. And those short connections tend to be more on the surface and can be more damaged when you have, a surfacic damage of the brain, which can happen with traumatic brain injury, for example. Although not all, because sometimes it gets deep in the brain. But that gives you, in terms of cognition, that gives you the perspective that a new function emerge from the association between short U-shaped fibers and neighboring regions, and then are supported later on by longer connections, and you have this mechanism of a region, and then it create like a so you have the core region, and then you have a belt of new regions that get around here, and they're connected by U-shapes, but themselves they're going to become core and create those like belt of new regions, and that gonna stretch that first connection to create new U-shaped fibers. That themselves, these new regions gonna do it, and in so doing, the longest fibers would be the oldest onto the evolutionary tree, and the shortest fibers the newest, just through a mechanism of like you gotta connect your neighbors. And on this, you put like some pruning with time of what is necessary, and you should end up with the beautiful networks that we see in the brain. It's not my theory. It's a mix between Sanides theory. It's been further developed in the book by Pandya on cerebral cortex, Pandya and Petrides, and I forgot the other authors. And on this, you had like for the pruning and the network, the theories of decon onto like the evolution of the network. So I should probably write that somewhere. But yeah. So that's what it gives to us, because there is no measure really of cognition. Then what you can do, you can maybe take those species and think about, oh yeah, well, those species are climbing trees, those are not, and is there like similarities and difference where they are, and how can we relate that to specific like living differences or environmental differences?
But also you can then end up with like quirky things like pigeons and fish can count. So maybe it's a function that spread through all the species.
Yeah, maybe they use the same network, and that's a convergent evolution. Maybe they use a different network, and then we can think that the representation of numbers or the way they approach it is different. How is it different? I don't know, but if that's a different network, that shouldn't be exactly the same.
Yeah.
But there is something behind this convergent evolution that require more work. It's something maybe we didn't understand yet. I don't know.
Cool,
so many things we don't understand yet. That's why we have enough to have a weekly discussion.
Yeah.
Great. I don't see any more questions, so I'm gonna use this opportunity to finish on time this week and wish you an exciting week in science. See you next Monday for some more Neuroccino Journal Club discussion. And as I said, anyone who's interested in presenting a paper, just get in touch with me and we can organize it. Any volunteers welcome. Until then, have an exciting week in science, and we see you Monday morning. Bye.
Bye.